Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Okay, hello to everybody. It's 14:05 French time, so I suggest we start. Further participants will probably join us, but let's not waste too much time and let's start this webinar. So a few words of introduction. We are very happy to see so many of you joining this webinar. This webinar will be about tools, methods, and best practices for public awareness programs, financing public awareness programs. And this is organized by the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And this is to do with raising awareness for tobacco control linked with Article 12. I am Justine. I am in charge of this Knowledge Hub. And during the few hours we shall have together, I will ensure that we present to you some examples. And I do hope that we will have a lot of information. So a few points, a few practical points to start this webinar. First of all, please ensure you turn off your microphone if you're not about to speak. And also keep all your questions for the end of the webinar. We'll have a question and answer session then. Or you'll also be able to, you can also send your questions via the chat function. The speakers will speak either in French or in English, whatever they prefer, but there are several options available to ensure everybody can hear and follow this webinar properly. First option, you can follow what's called the main audio, the webinar in the original languages, if you're happy with both French and English. Second option, you can listen to the webinar in the original language, but also have a written transcript, clicking on the button, which is called subtitle, I think, or afficher les sous-titres or display subtitles. Third option, you can listen to the whole webinar either in French or in English. And for this, you have to click on this sort of globe at the bottom, interpretation, which is a globe at the bottom of your screen, and then you will choose whether you want to listen to speak to French or English. So you will then be able to listen to the live interpreting carried out by myself, Isabelle, and my colleague, Patricia. So
the participants who didn't yet succeed in choosing their option, they will be able to have the instructions. Some of the speakers, they will speak in French, others, they will speak in English. So to follow comfortably the webinar, you have three options. You can listen to the webinar in the original languages, so you have nothing to do. You can listen to the webinar in the original languages, but get some help with subtitles in the language of your choice. To do so, you have to click on, I think the word is caption in English, and then choose the language you want to read the caption in. And finally, the last option, if you want to listen to the webinar in only one language, French or English are available. You can benefit from our live translation device by clicking on interpretation and choose the language in which you want to hear the whole webinar. J'espère que c'est bon pour tout le monde. Je reviens donc en français.
I hope that everybody is understood properly the guidelines and the instructions to listen to the webinar. A few words of introduction, and I will let Dr. Tibor Slizagy give us a few words of introduction. Tibor is a public health and Chinese medicine master, and he's working with us since 2017, and he's talking about reports and management of knowledge to the Secretariat for this.
Yes, my name is Tibor Slizagy, and I would like to welcome you all on behalf of the Secretariat of the WHO Framework Convention on Tobacco Control to this webinar on financing public awareness programs and actions in tobacco control. I would like to start by thanking colleagues from the WHO FCTC Knowledge Hub on Public Awareness on Article 12 of the Convention for organizing this event today. Yesterday, on May 31st, we in the Convention Secretariat joined colleagues from WHO to celebrate WHO's World No Tobacco Day, whose theme was Grow Food, Not Tobacco. An important event with strong communication value. Parties to the convention, even in low-resource settings, celebrate the World No Tobacco Day and use it to communicate to their populations on tobacco control, and even more broadly, going beyond the designated theme of the day. For some countries, this is the only opportunity used to inform the public about tobacco and the harms that come with growing, producing, manufacturing, and consuming it, mostly due to lack of financial resources for broader and more sustainable campaigns. The webinar today will not only focus on the need to communicate more often, more strategically, more comprehensively about tobacco-related issues, it will also recognize that effective communication programs are resource-intensive activities and will try to describe solutions on how to find and ensure financial resources for such communication. We have the knowledge embedded in existing technical resources. We have the many examples of good practices from all over the world. We have guidelines for implementation adopted by the Conference of the Parties for Article 12. Those guidelines were adopted in 2010, and I suggest you all to consult these guidelines, their principles, and the guidance it gives to the parties for their actions. If I need to highlight only one component of it, I would like to say that communication and public awareness programs should be integral parts of comprehensive tobacco control strategies, plans, and programs, and should be implemented hand in hand with policy interventions, legislation, regulations, taxation and price measures, and so on. Only these measures together as a package could lead to the best results, the desired health impact. On the other hand, there is still a large gap between the needs and the financial resources available for tobacco control in most countries and also globally. We will hear today about approaches already applied or innovative ones on how to find the resources that need to be invested in tobacco control, including in public awareness programs, in line with Article 26 of the Convention, to have the desired long-term impact on the decline in tobacco use worldwide. And to this, I would like to wish you good deliberations. Thank you, and back to you, Justine.
Merci Tibor, un grand merci pour ta présence et tes mots de bienvenue.
Thank you, Tibor, for your presence. It was most welcome. I suggest that we start straight away the presentation with the first one, which is will give us a few, set the scene if you want, and this is to do for the FCTC, is regarding the long-term awareness programs and action. Why are we presenting this? Why is it important and vital to ensure we have important investment to ensure that the awareness programs are sustainable? Just to start with, first of all, a few introductions regarding our Knowledge Hub. First of all, as you know, there are several knowledge hubs of the FCTC around the world with various themes, hubs on taxation, we will hear about that later, on monitoring, on non-ingerence of tobacco industry. There are 9 FCTC knowledge hubs, And their role is to synthesize and to disseminate their expertise as regard their own specialist subjects to ensure that the party of the FCTC and the way of implementing the articles for the tobacco control. Usually there are two aspects for this. First of all, there's a website that will summarize all the data relating to the topic. And secondly, you will see that this is still being set up, and also the way of disseminating information and knowledge. And that will group different types of assistance for each of the signatory countries. It can be a webinar like this webinar today. It can also be some trainings, bilateral exchanges, or some type of various questions, and also technical support for the executions of some of the programs. So we're the newest of these knowledge hubs. We've been in existence only for about a year, and the topic that we deal is public awareness as specified in Article 12 of the Convention. And this is to do with education, communication, training as tools to ensure that the public is much more aware of this. The article is quite long, but I would invite you to ensure. So let's have a look at this. So this article highlights a few things. So first of all, access to information. So access to information is extremely important. And this risk is to do with health and also with economy. A second element, which is extremely important, is awareness. So this is also access to information, is when you take ownership of the data, and you can do something like that at a daily basis. And also some of the risks are extremely important regarding health, and also the advantages as regards tobacco cessation. Also, what's important for the FCTC in Article 12 is setting up education and training programs for the public as at large, but also is to be able to propose these programs to specific intermediaries, if you want, health workers, that sort of thing, media professionals, that sort of thing. And all that type of actors, players, who also will be able to promote the good word for tobacco control. And the last thing for the FCTC is public information, is to ensure that we set up this program, and also to ensure that the tobacco, the fight against tobacco is much more efficient. So for all this, what we have to do as regards, so let's go to the next slide. So we are a team of 7 people. Excuse me, the person is speaking extremely fast. It's a bit difficult. So we work with civil servant for Santé Publique France, which is a national agency for public health in France, and we work for tobacco prevention and health promotion. We have various expertise specialisms within our team that enables us to design, set up, and also assess the interventions as regards tobacco prevention, in particular as regards tobacco cessation. As I will now let one of my colleagues, Sofia Berosso, firstly speak to ensure that they are totally dedicated to the Knowledge Hub program. Could the speaker speak a bit slower? Okay, hello to everyone. This is now our specialisms, and we will now talk about media campaigns. So, and in particularly the tobacco prevention. So this means we have to design hard-hitting media campaign. We know through research that if they're well thought out and hard-hitting media campaign, they can be extremely efficient. For example, reduction of tobacco consumption, and also the increase in attempts in tobacco cessation, and also reducing the rate. So it is absolutely crucial that this campaign are an important aspect of strategies or exhaustive program of anti-tobacco, the fight against tobacco. And this has enabled us to have 12% of an increase of 12% of attempts of tobacco cessation to stop smoking. So when we are designing this, we have to take into account several elements. And whilst preparing the campaign, we have to ensure that it is part of a world program of tobacco control fight, and also as regards political initiatives and so forth, collective things. So the media campaign is also research to ensure that we are defining, identifying the targeted public, and also pre-tests are very often carried out as regards communication tools, and also as regards the public. As regards launching the campaigns, it's extremely important to ensure that we have the means to disseminate the channels, dissemination channels, and also the frequency at which these messages are sent. And finally, and also we have to ensure that we assess the campaigns as regards this. And we can do this following two types of assessment or review. First, assess or review the processes to measure the efficiency of the implementation, and also assess the results to ensure that we measure the impact of the campaign. So now, this is one of the first cases we had. A few months ago, we had a very fast study as regarded the needs of the parties, and that was led by the Knowledge Hub. So what were their needs, and ensure that they could implement Article 12 to ensure that we could set up a relevant and useful assistance. And this was extremely important. So we had extracted several things due to the database from the World Health Organization. Also the tobacco control and funding means. And then we have declared, we have set up and validated a national strategic plan of tobacco control, but the budget for its implementation was at a big deficit. Therefore, there is no funds allocated specifically to tobacco control. And it's the same thing for Myanmar, and this is linked to Article 12. And this is targeted as regards a very recurrent theme, and that's why we decided to do this to ensure this webinar. I will now let my colleague take over.
Bonjour. Donc, je vais continuer avec la suite. Donc, ce manque de
I'm going to carry on with the rest, and I can explain at the moment for the new population, which is quite exposed, and we can show you all the activities linked to Article 12, and that's a pity compared to the impact of these activities in order to reduce the tobacco consumption. First of all, we're going to have some information that are coming from epidemiology study that has been done by the World Health Organization, WHO. And we have 45 countries that have made campaigns against consumption of tobacco by 2020. And these are campaigns that must have characteristics in order to have some functions. They need to have a minimum duration, some goals. You need to do some research, some tests, And to do enough work, you need to be working with a journalist to have an appraisal within a global program, and all that are things that are not done very well so far. And then if we looked in details, the 45 countries, we're going to have 45 countries who have done high-level campaigns, with 15 countries with high levels, 27 countries with intermediary levels of income, and 3 pays with the countries having least income, because about 64% of the population was not made aware of the campaign for the countries with the least income. In order to give the conclusion, about half the countries haven't made a national campaign recently, about half of the world population that was not informed about the media awareness campaign by 2020. And regarding the countries that are doing it, very few are doing it intensively and frequently and with impacting messages. So now we're going to give you a few examples in order to conclude, a few examples that can show the importance of funding the awareness campaigns against tobacco consumption. The first of all, it's a campaign that happened in Australia. It was a media campaign, big size media campaign that started in 2010, and in 2013 it was suspended. There was a study that was made in order to see the impact of the suspension of the campaign, and we were able to see that when the campaign was stopped, it did not achieve its goal to reduce the tobacco consumption. There was not any clear goals. And regarding the study's results with the health ministry, they wanted to restart the campaign in 2014 because it was very important to reduce the tobacco consumption. So we can see the importance here to maintain the pressure through the media campaign to reduce the tobacco consumption. So it needs to be done long-lasting campaigns. That's a long-lasting campaign in order to have a sustainable result for the reduction of tobacco consumption. And finally, if we look at the cost efficiency of the Stop Sober cost efficiency campaign that happened in the UK since 2012, and it's on the theories of change, behavioral change, what we can do for people to stop smoking. The question was, what is the cost efficiency measure for this campaign that was made since 2012? It is true that in 2012, we had an increase of about 50% of people trying to stop smoking. And we noticed that there were 350,000 people trying to stop, 350,000 people trying to stop smoking. We could see the cost efficiency at the campaign, and it was able to save over 10.4k lives with an inferior cost of £415 per year of life saved. And we have the same program that was adapted in France. That was the month without tobacco, Le Mois Sans Tabac. And an economic study is going to come soon, and it was done by the OCDC for the economic unit of the OECD. And this economic study shows that in large proportion, it is a very efficient campaign, and we were able to do some savings health-wise and otherwise, saving lives and costs in terms of care. And so when the campaign is well conceived, it can save you a lot of money, and it's quite interesting to do it. Now, a big thank to Sophia and Pauline for the first items to give us the context that will allow to everybody to see the real objective of this webinar. And now I would like to show you the next people who are going to give you their presentation. We're going to have the first one that will be done, Junda Shisha, from the WFTCC Knowledge Hub on tobacco taxation is going to talk about tobacco taxation as an opportunity for domestic resource mobilization. Then we will have a French example in point number 2 that will be done by Claire Demel from the General Direction of Health, Ministry of Health in France, Marie-Caroline Lay, who works at the National Fund for Insurance Company, and Charlotte Salaver, who's working for the Social Security at the Ministry of Health. Then after that, we're going to have Sylvia Raté, who's going to do us the sustainable funding mechanism for population-level tobacco control communication programs. And finally, we'll finish with Dudley Tartland, who's going to talk about investing in tobacco control, lessons learned from the investment cases carried out as part of the Convention Secretariat FCTC's 2030 project from Dudley Tartland. As I was telling you at the moment, do write your questions, because at the end of the webinar, we're going to have some question and answers, and we're going to try to answer to all your questions and to give you all the information that you were not able to have. So now I'm going to give the floor to Sunda Chisha, and I give a message to our interpreters and to everybody to speak slowly and very clearly for the interpreters to be able to carry out all the lovely information. Thank you very much. Sunda Chisha, up to you to get started and to share your presentation. Please, Sunda Chisha.
Okay, thank you very much, Pauline and Justine, for everything. I'm going to try and share my screen. Okay, can you see this?
Oui, elle n'est pas encore en mode présentation, toutefois.
Okay. All right, perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, my name is Sunda Chisha. I'm a program director at the WHO FCTC Knowledge Hub on tobacco taxation at the University of Cape Town. And it just gives me really great pleasure to be able to give some thoughts, I think, about tobacco taxation as an opportunity for resource mobilization for different programs. I've called this domestic resource mobilization, but that's really just a term that I think encompasses different activities that countries, organizations can use that money for within their contexts. So I'll just dive right in. So our unit really does quite a lot in terms of just understanding how taxes work. And we draw a lot of this information, obviously, from the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. And really what we focus on is on Article 6, which deals with price and tax measures, right? So price and tax measures have got specific guidelines, very much in line with the convention, with the FCTC. I've highlighted just 4 of those guidelines here, and I'm hoping that I'll be able to have some time to talk a little bit about how all of these fit into this broader context of resource mobilization. And hopefully towards the end, we'll talk a little bit also about earmarking taxes and how that might fit into this context. But really, these 4 guidelines are really the sort of best practice guidelines that we've come to learn over the years in terms of tobacco taxation, what actually works. So the first one there talks of, parties or countries really needing to consider implementing what's called a specific or a mixed excise tax system with a minimum specific tax floor. I'll explain a little bit what that means, but just hang on to that for a second. The second is to consider taxing all tobacco products in a very comparable way, right? So there shouldn't be too much differentiation in how tobacco products are actually being taxed. The third has to do with ensuring that excise taxes are constantly being increased, but this increase must be enough to cover for things like inflation and income growth in the economy. And then, of course, the fourth has to do with where do these monies go, right? Where can we dedicate some of these revenues? And the guideline is for parties to consider dedicating those revenues or part of those revenues to tobacco control programs. So in terms of what we know about what actually works for tobacco taxation, we have what's called a specific excise tax system. In general, there are two types of tax systems or tax structures available. The first is this specific excise tax, which has to do with basically levying a specific amount of money or a specific tax, a specific amount on a unit of products. So think of 20 francs for a pack of cigarettes, right? That would be considered a specific tax. The opposite end of that is what's called an ad valorem tax, and this has to do with a percentage of the value of a product. So if we said the value of a pack of cigarettes is, say, 70 francs, right? We would then say an ad valorem tax could be levied at, say, 10% of that 70 francs. And so you'd need to calculate that based on this percentage that needs to be calculated. There are then mixed systems where you have a component that levies, partly a specific component and partly an ad valorem component, and you mix those two together to come up with a mixed tax system, and that's employed by some countries around the world. So the EU, for instance, would employ similar sort of things. There's also what's called the ECOWAS directive, which affects countries in the Western African bloc. And then, of course, we have what are called tiered tax systems. So these are systems where you have differentiated rates based on some characteristic of the product, either where it's from, whether it's produced locally or imported, or whether it has a certain length versus a shorter length, and so on, whether it has a filter or no filter. So some countries have these products differentiated in such a way that they're able to apply different tax rates based on these different characteristics. What we've seen over time, and really from the evidence that's been generated over the years, is that best practice really is this application of this uniform specific tax, right? So you uniform because you're applying it across all different types of tobacco products, and you're applying it as an amount and not a percentage. The next best system, or the sort of similar type of system, or comparably best practice system as well, is a mixed tax system. So any one of these two systems is actually quite superior compared to the systems below that. So the ad valorem system or the tiered tax systems, for instance, are much less recommended. And so really, what does all of this have to do with tobacco taxes, right? We know that if these taxes are implemented correctly, right, they should induce a price increase. So if you think about this, when a smoker walks into a shop, they're not thinking about how much tax they're paying. They're thinking about the price of a product. So it's really the tax that increases the price of a product that's really going to have an impact on changes in consumption and so on. And what we know is that a 10% increase on average in terms of the price is really what's going to lead to about 4 to 8% decrease in tobacco use over time. And this varies depending on, whether a country is, developed or developing, and so on. And we also see this quite varied in terms of the subpopulations within countries. So low-income populations, youth, women who have higher responsiveness to changes in prices and so on. This particular nature of taxes leads to what we call a win-win nature of this particular policy, right? So an increase in the price is going to lead to a reduction in consumption of tobacco products. And what that means is that obviously that's a win for public health, right? Less consumption means that there are less people going to be smoking or using tobacco products, and also less amount of tobacco products being consumed by a particular smoker if they still maintain the habit. We also know that because of that, there's also going to be an increase in government revenue, right? And this is obviously what we're trying to get to at this point, right? So despite a decrease in consumption, we also see an increase in government revenue in most instances because of this, what we call inelastic demand, where a price increase is not proportional to the decrease that we see in consumption. And so it results in an increase in government revenue. So just based on that as sort of the background, where does the opportunity actually lie? When we look across the world, and just pulling some quick numbers from the WHO report on the global tobacco epidemic for 2021, which is the latest report that we have available, we see that at least 40 countries around the world have got ad valorem, purely ad valorem excise tax systems. Now, if these countries were to move from an ad valorem system to a specific excise tax system, that would be a positive move in terms of the overall impact that it's likely to have on just consumption itself. But over and above all of that, they could also have increases in the excise taxes, right? We know that the WHO has got a threshold of roughly 70% of excise tax share of the retail price, meaning that within the retail price, at least 70% of that retail amount that you're seeing needs to be excise tax. And if you look at this graph, you see that most countries don't even come close to that particular threshold, meaning there's a huge opportunity for countries to actually increase their excise taxes, whether or not they've got the specific excise tax structure, which is recommended, or they have the ad valorem excise tax structure. Obviously, the recommendation is for them to move from an ad valorem to a specific excise tax and then increase the excise taxes after that. But really, this is where the opportunity lies in terms of revenue generation. Because once countries are able to increase excise taxes and meet this threshold at the very least, and there's no reason why countries, you can see towards the end of this graph here that really there are some countries that are well above that particular threshold. So there's really no reason for countries not to go above that, right? And that threshold is really just a kind of marker for countries to sort of aim at, but not necessarily meet as the only obligation that they have. So they can actually go well above this particular threshold. And so the opportunity here, I think, is the fact that, countries can have, substantial revenues generated just from increasing their excise taxes and from raising, from changing the excise tax structures from ad valorem to either a mixed tax system or indeed a uniform specific excise tax system. When we sort of look at the overall picture, and this is just some data again pulled from the Tobacconomics cigarette tax scorecard, and what they do within this unit is basically they took a lot of the data that's pulled together by the WHO through this global report, and they looked at 4 factors. They said, we'll look at prices, we'll look at cigarette affordability or changes in cigarette affordability, tax shares, and tax structures. And each of these will have a 5-point scale. And the highest scale, the highest 5 points, is going to be the best practice in each of these. So if cigarette prices are high, they get a point of 5. And if cigarette affordability is changing or is decreasing, affordability decreasing means that people can't afford this product anymore, then that gives them a 5. Tax shares are increasing, again, a 5. Tax structure moves from ad valorem to a mixed system or to an ad valorem to a specific system, then again that's a 5. So in the map that you see over here, the lower scores are indicated in sort of this bluish color, and you can see that a number of countries, when we put these scores together, really have an opportunity to actually move forward in terms of tax reform. And all of these tax reforms can actually lead to additional revenue generation, right? So there's a great opportunity for a lot of countries around the world to be able to generate quite a bit more income for various activities, depending on a number of different factors. So the question is obviously, where can all this money go? Right, and this is where we have this question about, can monies actually be dedicated to tobacco control programs? And the answer is yes, right? This is actually recommended by the WHO FCTC guidelines on Article 6. and so it is something that countries should be considering within their different contexts. But it's not a very simple matter. It's actually quite complex. So to be clear, so earmarking basically refers to taking either all or a portion of total revenue from a tax or group of taxes and setting it aside for a specific expenditure purpose. There are differences in how you sort of define earmarking. So what I've given you there is a definition called revenue earmarking. There are other types of earmarking, expenditure earmarking, for instance, or soft earmarking and hard earmarking, a distinction that really has to do with the flexibility of how those funds are actually used once you've designated them as earmarked and so on. And you can see from the little picture that I have here that I pulled from a Pradi in 2020, basically shows that there's actually quite a continuum of how these resources can be earmarked. And so really countries sort of need to think about what works within their context, right? Earmarking is not necessarily a very straightforward practice. It's not a very straightforward activity because there are several different factors that several agencies, several
Et donc, il y a divers facteurs
think about
auxquels dont il faut tenir compte. Et
sorry, I'm getting some French in my.
Attendez, là j'ai entendu français.
Anyway, so the pros and cons of earmarking are legitimate, right? There are concerns within ministries of finance whenever you raise the question of earmarking. And so one has to sort of really look at the context and think carefully about what can actually work and how can these actually be implemented. There is a broader sort of macroeconomic and fiscal and as well as a political context to consider. But all of these things are things that can be quite easily dealt with. Sorry, my son's just walked into my room. So really the question is how does one actually sorry, I'm gonna have to.
I can't hear you, Zunda.
Yeah, no, I think that's because his son walked into the room. His son walked in. Yes, he's dealing with his son who came into the room. So I think he's going to try and he will be back in just a minute.
All right, I'm back. Sorry about that. So my 4-year-old just walked into the room and he wants to play. So hazards of working from home. Okay, so really I was talking about earmarking, right? And I was trying to address the fact that it's not a straightforward matter. There are several different factors that need to be considered, and countries need to sort of think carefully about what would actually work within their context. So as at about 2017, this number here might be slightly dated a little bit, but about 80 countries were already earmarking taxes for the health sector. So this is broadly the health sector, not necessarily just tobacco control. 54 of those were looking at health taxes, right? So money from health taxes was being dedicated to different activities within the health sector. And this is a practice that I think we can learn from, and things that have actually worked and things that have been a bit difficult to sort of implement. So getting earmarking right, what we've seen actually works is that if there is good precedent with other earmarked projects, it makes it easier to actually create another earmarked project, right? So if, for instance, earmarking from, say fuel levies or some other, budget, some other sort of tax has been earmarked for a particular project, for road projects, for other types of projects, and that particular process was successful, then it creates a platform for earmarking for any other type of specific activity that has a similar line with that. The other thing that we see is that, one of the dangers that we've seen in some countries is that earmarked projects tend to lead to a decline in revenues. And so the recommendation is that any revenue that is raised from earmarked projects should come from either new revenue sources or from an increase in the tax rate, right? And so it's not going to be something where you are, using already existing tax lines. It's an increase in the excise tax rate, or it's a new revenue source altogether that's going to be earmarked for a particular expenditure. The other thing that we've seen is that soft earmarking, which is this a sort of lighter touch or a lighter dedication of funds that's not necessarily linked to a particular law, a particular strict process for the revenue expenditure link, leads to easier adoption. It's more politically sensitive. It's more it tends to receive more public support, and it's easier seen within the public in terms of this link between where the revenue is coming from and where the expenditure is going to happen. And so that tends to boost public support for health taxes and for a particular expenditure outlined for it. But the other side of that coin is really, whichever agency is going to be, handling these taxes, these new funds that are going to be dedicated to it, must have a very clear plan on how that money is going to be used. It won't make any sense to anybody for the money to suddenly come and it's not being spent in the way, in any particular way that you wanted to spend it, or it's not being used fully in a particular direction. So it's extremely important for agencies, for countries, for different institutions to really think carefully about how much money is actually needed, what the money is going to be used for, and just work through the different issues that are required in order for that money to be completely spent by the particular fiscal cycle. And so some countries have had difficulties with this type of process where money suddenly sits for a year, 2 years, 3 years, and nobody's able to get to it because it was never fully, expected to be received. And so there wasn't any clear plan for what the money is going to be used for. So it's really important for countries to really think about what that money is actually going to be used for in the end. Related to that is, ensuring that the earmarking practice is actually embedded within the standard budgeting process. What that looks like is, you have the usual cycles of reviews, of ensuring that earmarking is being done correctly. And so budgets have typical cycles where once you've got a process, once you're starting the process, you have submissions for what the money needs to be spent for in a particular fiscal year. You also then have the final budget that's then presented, and eventually you have some sort of review on what was actually done with that money in the preceding year. All of these needs to be part of the earmarking practice. So it needs to be embedded within all of that so that there's a governance structure around it to ensure that there's accountability, to ensure that there isn't any kind of misuse of funds or anything like that that might lead to public outcries and things like that, and disintegrate the entire earmarking process. So it's important that the more embedded it is within the natural budgeting process, the more likely it is going to be accepted within, ministries of finance and other agencies that deal with these sorts of things on a more regular basis. So those are some of the things that, we've learned over the years that seem to be working right in many countries that have actually done earmarking. We can't speak about all of the issues. There are some really great resources out there that have been developed by WHO and others. I've outlined a couple of these here, but really they're great at really highlighting the different issues that come up when it comes to talking about earmarking and where money can be spent and how it can be spent for specific activities, and what has worked and so on. So just to conclude, really taxation is I think an important tool for domestic resource mobilization. it generates government revenue. And I think that's what we're really trying to get at during this particular discussion. But we can't forget the fact that, you know, over and above all of this, it really does save lives, right? Which is its main tool in our context, I think. It saves lives, and that's going to, over time, actually save the government quite a lot of money in terms of its expenses on NCDs and things like this. And I'm sure we'll hear about a little bit more of this later on. But it also promotes health equity. I think I showed in one of the slides that really the sensitivity to price changes is highest amongst those that are you know, likely to get the biggest burden of disease from NCDs and other diseases related to tobacco. So it promotes health equity by reducing consumption in those particular populations and so on. And of course, we can generate government revenue through increasing tobacco taxes and applying the appropriate tax structures and so on. Thank you for your time. Apologies for the slight lapse with my son, but I hope you picked up something, and I look forward to the questions at the end. Thank you very much.
Un grand merci, Zunda. C'était très intéressant.
A big thank you to you, Zunda. It was extremely interesting, and no problem at all with your little boy for that little interlude. And I suggest that we link this to the next presentation, which is a French example of tobacco taxation, an example of France. So I will let Claire Dumel, Marie-Caroline Laillé, and Anne-Charlotte, and the three of them are going to present to us this example of the addiction fund, a French example of financial support. How is it used? How is it structured for public tobacco control policies? So Claire Dumel, Marie-Caroline Laillé, and Anne-Charlotte Salaver. Okay, so I'm going to present you this addiction fund with my colleagues from the French Health National Agency, if you want. So basically, what we realized is that we had more and more plans and strategies that were articulated more or less with each other as regarded the fight against addictive behaviors. So this is the main policies in France, the main health strategy in France, targeting addictions and tobacco use. And also we have more specific programs like the funding for fight against tobacco control. And also we have a strategy, interministerial strategy, mobilization strategy against addictive behaviors. But all these various free plans, were not always funded with various funds, and it was difficult to have an overall visibility of the funding as regarded addictive behaviors. This is why in 2016, the law created the fund for tobacco control, tobacco use fight, and then which became then the addiction fund. So in 2019, we created governance rules in a decree, and also which was part of our social security code. And then this was broadened, and in 2016 it was only concerned tobacco. In 2019 we took all psychoactive substances, and in 2022 this fund now covers all addictions. So it's the first year where we also finance fund projects also due to gambling addictions, for instance, sports gamble addiction. So basically, this is a financial arm, if you want, of addictive behavior. So first of all, this fund, it was a tax for tobacco providers. And the tax would collect this tax, and then the principle was simple. This tax became part of the funding to fight against tobacco use. But very soon we reached the limit of this principle, because of course the revenue could be what was decreasing, for instance. And then in 2019, this fund had no sustainable resource. So in the short term, we adopted a temporary solution, which was to allocate to the health insurance a higher part of taxation from a value-added tax, which was given to the funds for the addiction fund. And then we had a more sustainable system, which meant we didn't directly allocate this tax just to for tobacco to the addiction fund. The whole of the taxes dedicated to the health insurance, it's a sort of national fund pot, if you want, and part of this is then given to the addiction fund and other funds. And also, this is done also to do with cannabis use, for instance, but that's very small. So as regards, so the state sort of designs the public policies and then ensures that then we have for the Caisse d'Assurance Maladie, which is the health insurance national fund, if you want. So to ensure this funding, there is a convention which is signed between the state and the various agencies for social security, COG, so a convention for objective and management, and then this, which defines the objectives to reach. This is a contract which formalizes delegating, managing the fund for social security. Part of this is an addiction fund, and this is over 5 years to enable us to fund this, and also to have a ceiling. For instance, the ceiling for this is 130 million euros. So we show that this fund will have 130 million euros over the next 5 years. Okay, so regarding dedicated governance for the addiction fund, there are 3 levels. First of all, it's the strategic direction orientation board, and once a year, the COS, they will define what are the priorities for the year to come to ensure that we can target what we're going to finance. And of course, they do the annual follow-up and assessment of financed actions. So, of course, all the various French agencies, UNCAM, also the MILDECA, so the Agency Against Addictive Substances and also against various addictions, and also public agencies working with addiction. And the second one is the more restrictive committee. So this is a strategic, there are strategic directives, and this steering committee, if you want, will give their opinion on the proposition, and then there will be a sort of edict, if you want. And they also part of this is the UNCAM, but also the central administration management. And then the third aspect, the first side, the third committee is a technical committee, which is an operational entity, and it's the same players as in the steering committee, because it stems from the steering committee, and therefore they do anything that's to do with operational follow-up and monitoring. And all this is supported by a secretariat, which at present is the health insurance entity who deals with that. So you can see that all the actions that will be funded by the addiction fund, there are 4 main axes. So at the moment, 4 main priorities. So the first one is to protect young people and to prevent tobacco initiation and other addictions with or without substance. So this is dedicated, is sort of primary prevention. The second theme is to help smokers to stop and to reduce risk linked to addiction with or without substance. So it's secondary prevention. The third one is to priority to amplify, leverage certain actions to priority publics And the fourth one, sorry, the lady is going extremely fast, is to sustain the applied research and assessment of the actions, prevention. But that is not enough. The actions that have been financed has to be within these four main aspects, chapters, if you want. So we've defined several things for this. So the main addiction fund, these projects maybe do not exist yet, or they exist, but we're going to leverage them. We're going to scale them up. And sometimes their efficiency has already been proven, and we finance this project with a relevant assessment to prove their efficiency. So what we do, we try to favor, give partnership, in particular as regards various sectors, so helping to house people who are in various precarious situation, help with children and so forth. So partnership with various agencies there, housing agency, child agency, and so forth. So there are several levels, and some of them can have an international or national scope. But at the national level, we may have some social marketing actions supported by Santé Publique France, for instance, research and study surveys, which will be funded, civil society players or the various associations, and also the national entity as regard the French mutuals and so forth. We will act at a national level in a large field, on a larger level. And at the international level, the Addiction Fund also contributes to the project with the FCTC and the WHO Secretariat. So there are various things which enable us to finance actions as regards the regions. Over the last few years, for instance, we try to ensure that we were able to roll this out and also against psychosocial addictions.
Des actions aussi portées par des acteurs de la société civile qui vont davantage agir au niveau local et avoir des relais locaux. Et puis, il permet aussi de financer des actions au niveau local grâce au réseau de l'assurance maladie qui va agir en lien avec certains acteurs locaux comme des centres d'examen de santé, comme des conseils départementaux. Il y a vraiment une volonté d'évaluer tous les projets qui sont financés par le fonds, puisque chaque action, chaque projet a une évaluation. Et d'autre part, le fonds de lutte contre les addictions s'est doté d'un marché évaluation pour évaluer des dispositifs plus transversaux et des thématiques plus transversales financées par le fonds de lutte contre les addictions. Donc sur la diapositive suivante, on voit qu'au total, sur les 5 dernières années, depuis que le fonds a été créé, 560 millions d'euros ont été engagés, avec, comme le disait Anne-Charlotte, un plafond annuel à 130 millions d'euros depuis 2020. Donc, les projets qui sont financés peuvent cibler spécifiquement le tabac, l'alcool, les drogues illicites, mais la plupart du temps, ce sont des projets qui ciblent les polyconsommations, voire depuis maintenant un peu plus d'1 an, les usages problématiques des écrans, des jeux d'argent et de hasard et des jeux vidéo. On donne des priorités grâce aux orientations proposées par le Conseil d'orientation stratégique et ont déjà été favorisés des projets qui ciblaient les jeunes, les parents, les femmes enceintes, les publics précaires, les publics avec handicap, les usagers consommateurs et d'autres publics encore. Et certains milieux de vie ont aussi pu être spécifiquement ciblés, comme le milieu rural, comme les établissements et services du secteur de l'accueil, de l'hébergement, de l'insertion et du logement accompagné, ou encore des structures de la protection maternelle infantile ou de l'aide sociale à l'enfance.
Voilà, donc je vais prendre la parole. Bonjour à tous, donc Claire Dumer, donc je suis coordinatrice du programme national de lutte contre le tabac et je participe au comité technique du Fonds de lutte contre les addictions, donc avec Anne-Charlotte et Marie-Caroline. Donc voilà, on va vous présenter un focus sur les actions de tabac qui sont financées par le Fonds de lutte contre les addictions. En effet, donc on a vu une évolution du fonds qui passait du Fonds de lutte contre le tabac, ensuite au Fonds de lutte contre les addictions sans substance, puis au Fonds de lutte contre les addictions avec substance. Sans substance, pardon, l'inverse. Mais il nous paraissait vraiment important, malgré tout, de maintenir une priorité des financements sur les addictions avec substance, et notamment alcool et tabac. Et tabac, en fait, on a pu s'appuyer sur les recommandations de la CLAT, de l'OMS. Et donc, on a pu mettre en place un programme national dédié. Donc, dès 2014, on a mis en place un premier programme national de réduction du tabagisme, qui était un volet vraiment dédié aux fumeurs, notamment, pour les aider à réduire le tabagisme. Donc, il a mis en place un arsenal de mesures juridiques. Donc là, on peut penser au paquet neutre, par exemple, ou les traitements de substitution nicotinique avec des prescripteurs qui ont été dédiés. Il y a eu ensuite un programme national de lutte contre le tabac dès 2018, puisque le premier programme était terminé avec anticipation. Et donc, c'est un programme qui vient de s'achever. Ce programme-là a une dimension encore plus large, puisque là, nous avons associé le ministère de l'économie avec le ministère de la Santé. Et donc, on a pu mettre en place un certain nombre de mesures à la fois sanitaires, sociales et économiques. Et donc, en mesure phare, par exemple, on a mis en place une augmentation du prix du paquet de cigarettes à 10 €, ou encore des mesures de traçabilité des produits du tabac. Et puis, un troisième programme est en cours de préparation et qui devrait être lancé en 2023. Donc avec une ambition d'aller encore plus loin dans la dénormalisation du tabac, de protéger les jeunes. On vise une génération d'adultes sans tabac en 2032. Et puis, il y a un enjeu aussi de réduire les inégalités sociales de santé. Puisque je ne l'ai pas dit, vraiment, il y a un programme dédié en France, puisque le tabac est la première cause de mortalité en France, avec 75 000 décès évitables chaque année liés au tabac, 45 000 décès liés au cancer, et puis aussi 16 500 décès liés aux maladies cardiovasculaires. Donc, vraiment un enjeu de santé publique. On a encore donc 12 millions de fumeurs en France. Cela représente un quart de la population. Donc, voilà, donc c'est vraiment un enjeu. Et donc, le fonds vient en appui des actions qui figurent.
And we wanted to do some actions regarding this, and we can do for the next slide. And as we were saying it for Caroline, we can see the different actors on the regional and national level. Regarding the national level, we could see the institutions, namely the cases for the public health, and we could see the insurance companies, and we could see all the marketing campaigning that was done marketing-wise, and from public Health France authority, we could set up the action consume less tobacco with all the social marketing measures that were done for all the people who wish to stop smoking. And we did it in November in France for over a month. And we wanted to do it upstream, recruitment measures to recruit ex-smokers and to support the smokers who decided to stop smoking. And we wanted to do it with different media. So we've got a big impact that could be done with the funds to fight against addictions, and we could do it within that operation. So the smokers were fully supported on the website Tabac service for all the information in order for them to stop smoking. There was a anti-tobacco app as well, financed by the insurance companies, and we could see that it was done. So the fund was subsidizing all the research, for example, on tobacco consumption. We could do it on the addictive substance consumption organism that was able to help us about it regarding the tobacco consumptions. And I can say for 2 studies that was done, Tabatrash, which was a study made on tobacco consumption, and regarding the price of tobacco, Tabatrash, so the trajectory for the consumption and the exit to stop consuming tobacco, and Tabac for the tobacco in prison. We could see the sociological step of the research that was done. And we also had the French Institute of Research Against Cancer that associated themselves to the project to fight against tobacco, for example, on the stigmas of consuming tobacco products. And we were able to have more than 60 projects that were financed by the funds. And parallelly speaking, we were able to have more structures regarding research and also to do it throughout the network. And we were able to create a doctoring post in order to help financing researchers' post positions in order to fund researchers' work on tobacco consumption. And we have programs that more on an operational level, community level programs, health-wise, namely programs that were done by the Mutualité Sociale Agricole, a farming insurance company, and we were able to do it with interviews that were done with the companies done over the last few years in order to have more interviews to be done to target the people who are currently smoking, people who are often coming from least economic developed segment of the population. And we had the cancer fund as well that associated themselves to that campaign, and they were targeting establishment, for example, targeting people least economically active for their in order to reduce their tobacco consumption by making them more aware and to support people who wanted to stop smoking altogether. So on the national level, a few examples of action that were financed by the civil societies, which were heavily mobilized in France. So on 3 themes from the main actors: the denormalization of tobacco consumption. We are supported by all different organizations. They want to have spaces without tobacco consumption, non-smoking areas for the beaches, the parks, in order to set up measures, for example, to go to the beach on the seafront and to have a space where there's no tobacco consumption. A few coffee terraces, the coffee, you know, that the part which is open outside the coffee shop, where people were able to be in an area without any tobacco consumption. 90% French films are still showing people smoking, so it can have a lot of influence, namely on the youth. So we wanted to have support from the National Committee to fight against tobacco consumption, and we wanted to have mystery shoppers as well in order to see how it was done in terms of fighting against tobacco consumption, and to have an observatory point for tobacco consumption. Another thing that was very important, number 2, the fight against the underinformation or disinformation of the civil society regarding tobacco questions, tobacco issues. We created the site Generation Without Tobacco, Génération Sans Tabac, as you can see it here, where you had some news and information regarding tobacco consumption, which was very interesting. And we funded as well the ACT Association, which is a campaign of public relations targeting political decision makers, media, and the public. And we wanted to do it with a third, to have a strategy, a sustainable strategy of communication targeting the youth regarding tobacco consumption. We wanted to do MAD digital, which is an elaboration of scientific context in order to disseminate scientific content to youth. We wanted to go towards the young people, Avenir Santé, Future Health, and to adapt the format to media, social formatting in order to communicate with the peers on the social media platform with the association, for example, Rentre entre dans le game, enter into the game, which means a social network that is targeting 12 to 25 youth in order to have a social media to help them to stop smoking and give them information on tobacco consumption. And we funded as well actions, regional actions, and we are funded by the health institutions. Each year we've got 32 million euros in order to set up local measures to fight against tobacco consumption. And they have two main priorities. Fighting against tobacco consumption, as Caroline said it, and the psychosocial competencies as well to develop them. And so at this stage, since 2018, we've got 456 establishments of health that have entered into the program of health premises without tobacco consumption. We wanted to have 3 pillars to target it, to target smokers, to operate it for stopping tobacco consumption, for example, when people were leaving the hospital. We were targeting healthcare professionals, like in France, in order to have a different program done. And the third one, which was the amenities, the hospital amenities and clinical amenities, to promote that the tobacco is not visible on these premises. So we did it. We had quite a lot of results because we had the health crisis pandemic as well that impacted it, and we were able to do it. And we were aiming maternity, cancer treatment centers. We wanted to make it widen to all the health institutions, establishments, and medical social institutions as well, to put specific action in place to live without tobacco. And we had over 885 projects to fight against substance addictions, and locally as well. We wanted with the insurance companies, we wanted to set up measures, more proximity measures at that level, to put it in link with health public authority France, and to do it within a project. 885 projects were deployed over the last few years. And also we wanted to do medical centers that were engaged for people to stop consuming tobacco consumption, particularly to the least economically active segment of the population, to take care their cost for stopping tobacco consumption. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you very much for listening to it. And a big thank you to all of you, because I could see that your presentation were very interesting, because quite a few questions were asked in the chat, mainly people who wanted to set up in touch with you. So please do it by writing. Take care at the end of seminar session for your question and answers in order to reply it orally. And now I offer you to do with the next presentation, and I'm going to give you Sylvia Rands, who's going to do her presentation. And of course, rapidly, Sylvia Rath, who's going to do the presentation. Sylvia Rath is going to do the different sustainable funding mechanism for population level tobacco control communication programs, to see what has been done on the strategy level and how we were able to support countries with setting up the sustainable funding mechanism. Thank you very much. Can you all see my presentation, please? Yes, we can see it, but it's not in diaporama mode, broadcast mode. We can see other things apart from your presentation. So it's just the settings for displaying, sharing the presentation. And now we're going to do it. Okay, that's good. Brilliant. Thank you very much. And now I'm going to switch to English, if that's okay with you, because I know the terminology in English. So I'm going
apologize because I'm going to speak English for this, so my colleagues from the French Santé Publique France are not used to hear me speak in English, but I think it will be better because I've got English slides, and also because as some of you, I recognize a few names on the list of participants. Is I've not been in tobacco control for a few years, and I'm stepping in for my colleagues at Vital Strategies who have worked on this topic from the communication side. But I've been in tobacco control 20 years. And I think some of the information that I'm going to present to you has not changed. So maybe there's also some challenges that remain, but there's also a lot of progress. But I think some of the underlying challenges are still there, although much has been done. So the first thing I wanted to talk to you about is we're going to talk about the sustainable funding mechanisms for mass media campaign, but strategic communication, essentially. Strategic communication being covering mass media campaign, but also everything that's around it, like earned media and journalist training. And so we go a bit larger than mass media campaigns, but the mass media campaigns are the most important part to get denormalization going, to get to ensure that we have a context that is that has been given, that has been put, so for people to be able to act in this context. So Pauline at the very beginning just gave all the good data on what public mass media campaigns can do and where we at globally. And I'm just going to say to you a few words about how we get some kind of funding. So we've heard about the example of France and the addiction fund, and we've heard as well about taxation and the earmarking. We at Vital Strategies started in 2017 a project on looking at what was out there, you know, how were countries funding population level tobacco control communication programs, mass media campaigns. How were they working on this? How were they managing? And we've got a paper that was shared at COP7, I think it was. Tibor and Patricia Lambert, my recall. But really, that's 2017. So some of the information may be, you know, needing to be updated, but it's still, you know, very much what we found on what was out there is still going to be relevant there. So this document is online. I've put the link at the end of the presentation, and it has, you know, it just looks at the policies, the funding mechanisms that are out there, what we looked at, and with the view to develop a policy framework and also to have accompanying tools in the future to be sure that we're looking at the impact of the dollars or the euros or the local currencies being used. I think it was our colleague who presented the taxation and the earmarking that explained how important it was to plan well and to know where the money should go, right? I think that's quite a good, interesting point to take away, because if you have funds and if you create a taxation fund or a public health fund and you can't use it and you will lose it, then it really has other challenges in the future. It really has, so you need to be able to also, once you've raised funds, to be able to use them well and show the impact. And I think the French example of everything that has been presented to you on what has been supported by the fund is really interesting. So evaluation as well is important. So let's get into, you know, the few solutions. What are the mechanisms that are out there? What are the mechanisms that have been used by countries? So we'll look at the transfer of mass media campaign costs, like communication costs, to the tobacco industry or to other parties that promote tobacco. So just shifting the burden of the cost to the tobacco industry. I think that's one of the really important focus, because, you know, if we think about use of public funds, I think it's important that the one industry that is making quite a lot of money should be made to pay in some ways, principle of polluter payer, or, you know, other principles. But so that's the first way that countries in our examples have been able to fund mass media campaigns and communication campaigns overall. I think you had a really good analysis of the tobacco tax revenue and the earmarking, and we got that very well covered, so I'll spend less time on this. But then there are other ways, and I think, you know, I was really looking at the data again, and maybe some of the participants in this webinar will be able to update some of our information as well. But one of the ways of getting mass media campaign airing time is to ask broadcasters to provide free airtime for mass media campaigns. So I'll go into the detail and the specific Turkish example that I have, but really, I'm still surprised that we're not using that more, and maybe it would be an interesting case study to look into this, you know, in terms of this is a legal, you know, requirement. So maybe some of our lawyers or other participants may be able to comment on this. And then, of course, there's the regular funding commitment from government funding. And I think, you know, it's been Australia. I think it was Pauline at the beginning that showed the Australian commitment, high commitment, and also what happens when you stop, right, as well, and the danger of this. So the importance of having regular funding commitment from government. So if we look at shifting the burden to the tobacco industry, right, what are the options? So, and again, there might be other examples that are not captured in our analysis that dates from 2017, but one of the examples we've got from Brazil is using licensing fees, taxing, you know, licensing fees, not taxing, but licensing fees for manufacturers or brands. And these fees can be used, have been used by the federal agency in Brazil to test tobacco products, and also to support enforcement activities of tobacco control legislation. Another type of action is what we call court or regulator mandated corrective campaigns. For example, the example we use and we that will be detailed in our report is that when Australia and Canada successfully complained about the deceptive nature of the light or the mild branding. I don't know if you remember this, but at some stage it was still allowed in many places. In both cases, the industry was required to pay for public notices to put out that the so-called light cigarette was not dangerous. So they had to pay for corrective campaigns when they'd been misleading the public, for example. Then there's litigation settlements. I think Patricia Lambert, who's on this call, I see has got a lot of background on this, but one of the main, potentially the largest mass settlement and it was in 1998 in the US, the master settlement, where all the states sued the tobacco industry, and the majority of states were successful in their litigation. Then we have also fine and damages, so suing tobacco industry for violation of tobacco control legislation. In France, we have NGOs able to sue the tobacco industry, the CNCT or DNF, or all the association like NGOs working in the. I think the field has been a little bit enlarged now, but at least working in tobacco control can actually be the protector of the legislation and sue the industry and gain compensation. And fine and damages. So that's one way as well, where there could be this funds can then be used for campaigns and informing the public appropriately. So this is to transfer mass media campaign costs to the tobacco industry. And we have other examples as well, other interesting example where you could get counter advertising paid. So for example, in India, when the tobacco advertising ban went into force, the tobacco companies developed some new strategy for marketing their products, of course, as usual, and they started to promote products in movies. But the Indian government amended the existing tobacco control legislation and mandated the screening of pre-approved anti-tobacco ads and disclaimer at the beginning, the middle, and at the end of the film. So there's also, other ways of countering the tobacco industry and its strategic divisive action. Dedicating tobacco tax revenue to mass media, I think I don't need to go in more details, has been done. It can be seen in many countries. The Tobacco Control Fund in Vietnam invested some of its funds in 2015 and potentially beyond. Sorry. I think we could maybe just. This is, a really good way of using taxation and to just replenish the coffers for media campaign, communication campaign that is really needed. But I think we've covered the dedication of tobacco tax revenue really well. The one I wanted to talk to you a little bit more, and that's the one that I'm particularly really keen, maybe we can have a further discussion, is what we managed to do in, or the Turkish government managed to do back in 2008 is to mandate by law that the broadcasting TV, radio channels must provide 90 minutes every month of free airtime to government or NGOs tobacco control education program, including 30 minutes in prime time. That is quite considerable amount of time. So I'm thinking, just when we legislate, when we amend our legislations, and when we just to think of this kind of maybe articles. So I know there are other challenges in some countries, and but it'll be really interesting. I think for some countries it might be a really good a good way to get something very cheaply. And then the national commitment, multi-year funding commitment, I think Pauline just covered very well at the beginning, that's the necessity to continue to fund regularly and to the right level national public health campaigns, tobacco control campaigns. We've seen, we now have enough evidence to say that, we know exactly at what level, and there's a number of publications on this. So I'm just going to give you the report link here. So I hope you will have time to read it. I also think that Pauline and others, we may want to look into a translation at some stage if that's useful. I don't know what's in the pipeline, but if that was, and the team at Vital Strategies, my colleagues, will be really happy as well to help you in any ways. And if you have any question, you could address them to me first, and then for those of you who know our team at the comms team at Vital Strategies, I invite you to just send out directly your questions as well. Thank you very much.
Un très grand merci, Sylviane.
Thank you so much to Sylviane for this presentation and an extremely concrete, pragmatic example, and well done on respecting the time that was allocated to you, Sylviane. So really a big thank you to you. So we now have time for the last presentation from Dudley Tarleton. So Dudley, I'll let you please project your. So this is the PNUD from the UNDP is going to present us the tobacco control investment cases in various countries and show us how Article 12 can be made efficient in public awareness campaigns. Thank you very much, Dudley.
Perfect. Thank you, colleagues. I'm guessing you're seeing the notes page. Let me see.
Oui.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
I mean, it's not that big a deal, but let me see if I can switch over to get it on the other side. Okay, so this. All right. In the meantime, I'm happy to introduce myself. I'm Dudley Tarleton from the UN Development Program, and happy to be with you today and to present some joint work that we've done in the last few years with the Secretariat of the FCTC, with WHO, and with, I think, 37 governments from around the world. I'm going to take a chance that this is going to be projected over here. Yeah, okay, great. Now, if you see the notes, it's not a big deal. So,
on ne voit pas la présentation, je crois. En tout cas, de mon côté, je ne la vois pas.
We can't see your presentation as yet, Dudley. We could see it initially, but not now.
I'm going to move it over here. Okay, any better?
On la voit en présentation avec les notes, mais c'est pas très grave en effet.
Okay. Apologies for that. I'll just continue. So some joint work we've done on investment cases, really making advocacy for scaled up investment on the key tobacco control interventions countries are obliged to invest in as they ratify the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control. This work is part of a project called the FCTC 2030 project. There are other investment cases we've done that look at tobacco control as well. Those are on non-communicable diseases with many of the same people. But since those really look at the tobacco control interventions and how they affect only 4 diseases, it's better to look at these tobacco control specific ones, which look at, actually, they model the impact on 40 diseases and conditions. So just a quick word, if anyone hasn't seen these, they're available online on the FCTC's website. I think if you Google investment cases FCTC, you'll get the whole page, but you can also write me and I can share all these other materials with you. We really try to make them engaging, so not too technical, and appealing to non-tobacco control experts as well. So they're brief reports, PowerPoints, an Excel-based model with the results, infographics, other multimedia deliverables that we launch in a joint multi-sectoral ministerial level event in countries. So of these, 21 have been launched in the last few years. The countries are listed here. And launching this year, a few more of these as well, 17 more, where most of these, I think all of these, the work is essentially done and they're with the governments for clearance now. So of these, we've taken a selection of, I think 30 of the countries have, 600 people. So really important to note that they sometimes take longer than you think they would take, because we really make sure and take care to engage national partners so that they own the investment case results, the process, everything grounded in the political context of the countries. And we really reach out to as many sectors as we can to make sure these aren't just international exercises. The interventions we generally model, they're not all modeled in all countries, and I'll explain that in a little bit, but these are the ones that you would expect most likely. Taxes increased, the communication campaigns, of course, smoke-free public places, plain packaging, as well as graphic health warnings, brief advice to quit for cessation, and then bans on tobacco advertising, sponsorship, and promotion. Now, they're not all modeled in all countries, because if the baseline is high enough, the results won't show much, because there's already a high level, so there isn't a huge return from further investment in. Even though when you're doing well, everyone still needs to take care that some investment still goes into maintaining high levels of performance. So the 30 countries we've modeled where we did model mass communication campaigns are listed here. Not important to keep track of every country, of course, but it's a good range of large countries, smaller countries, high levels of tobacco control implementation, lower levels, high burden, low burden. Overall, probably a little bit higher tobacco use than just the average country, because these are the countries that asked the UN for help. But it's still relatively representative, I think. We take those 30 countries and we look at first the economic burden of tobacco use in the country. About 2.1% of GDP lost on average per year to tobacco-related illnesses. And those are the tobacco attributable fractions of 40 diseases and conditions. And this subsection of countries, which leaves out the 7 countries where we didn't model this, it's interesting that this 2.1 is just slightly lower than the overall average, which implies that the countries we didn't model, who are doing more tobacco awareness campaigns, are losing less. Are losing less. So it implies already you can see a bit that it's cost effective. One important part of the investment case to note is you can see the iceberg metaphor. This visible part, these are the healthcare spending costs attributable to tobacco. The 84% are the economic productivity losses. And this helps us get the message out that if you're the Ministry of Labor, if you're the Ministry of Commerce or Economy, you really have a huge stake in getting tobacco control right. And it's not just a matter of funding for the health ministry or the health sector. Some more numbers overall from these 30 countries. This isn't really just old people dying, which is not great. When old people die of tobacco use, still it's something worth fighting against. But nearly 60% of the deaths in the countries where we're looking at that are attributable to tobacco use are premature deaths, so younger than 70. And this is where much of this impact on the economy comes from, you can see. So the per capita burden in these countries, the economic burden overall, $92 per person per year. Really significant, given the size of some of these countries for sure. And if you, again, that balance between healthcare spending, take out the healthcare spending, still the economic productivity costs are $77 per person per year in the countries. If we were to aggregate the results for the benefits of investing in tobacco control, if the countries were to implement all the tobacco control measures at the level recommended, so not world-leading, best-in-class implementation, just meeting the WHO recommendations and targets, 1.1 million fewer deaths per year, and $64 billion in restored economic activity over a 15-year period. So again, looking a little bit further at the benefits of tobacco control, this looks at the 15-year. We also have numbers for year one all the way through 15 years. But for every $10,000 invested in tobacco control, about 18 deaths can be averted. And if you look at all types of health financing, multilateral health initiatives, this one is really competitive. You can get a lot of averted illness and death for not a lot of investment in tobacco control. The savings, if you look at that big number we showed in the last slide, overall, that's $254 per person over 15 years. And most importantly, where these savings come from, you would see a 47% reduction in cigarette smoking prevalence if the modeled measures were implemented at the recommended level. So now that we've been doing the investment cases for a few years, we can start to track, informally at least, which governments are putting into practice actions that are recommended in the investment cases. And it's important to note that these are not attributable to the investment cases or the work of the UN, that at best we're giving a push to longstanding efforts in the countries. But it's important to note what happens after going in and doing these investment cases. And we've identified 27 policy and legislative measures in 17 of these countries. And you can see down near the bottom, only one of them so far that we found. Maybe there very well may be more that we just haven't seen, but only one so far on public awareness campaigns. And I'll come to that one at the end of the presentation in a few minutes. So if we were to take just those measures that we had in the last slide, things that have done already, and look at what's the benefits will be for those countries by 2025 already, and we're nowhere near full implementation of the recommended measures, but already we think the countries can count on 87,000 averted deaths by 2025 and $1.2 billion in restored economic activity. So looking now specifically at Article 12 implementation or public awareness campaigns, and the modeling is based on holding them regularly. So it's not just a one-off investment. But the cost over the first 5 years of implementation, $8.50 US per capita. And the benefit already over that 5 years is $157 per capita per person. So already, I think it's really by year 3. We give a couple of years to adopt the policy, plan it, and then year 3, things really get underway. So already by year 3, the returns are positive. So even within the current political cycle in most countries, you can get the return on the investment put into regular public awareness campaigns on tobacco control. By year 15, if you look at the full picture, it gets even more cost effective. The costs only go up to $21 per person, and the average person in the country, everybody, smokers, non-smokers alike, the benefits are about $1,111 roughly, just from this one type of intervention. I don't want to dwell too much on this because it could be misleading, but it's interesting to look at the return on investment by country. So this takes the full 15-year ROI. And there really is quite a big range, but it's important to note that in no country is the return on investment less than 780%. And if you could invest your money in a stock or a bond that got a return like that over 15 years, it would be the deal of the century. So that's a worst case scenario. And then in some countries, you can see in Asia particularly, over 200 to 1 return on investment over 15 years. Now, of course, the ROIs are going to be higher where implementation baselines are lower and where the burden is high. So some of these countries, the numbers don't look as impressive because already they may be doing well on this intervention. Already they may have a lower tobacco burden than other countries. But even still, in every country we've looked at, the ROI has been significant. So that one case where we found evidence of the recommendation being implemented, I'm happy to say was in Jordan, where we had one of the highest overall tobacco burdens of the countries we've looked at. And beginning in May 2019, they launched an anti-tobacco campaign, a public awareness campaign. It was estimated in the investment case that over 15 years, that campaign, if sustained, would return 130 to 1 return on investment. And so the health impacts that this is based on imply nearly 1,100 live deaths averted this year and $210 million in restored economic activity just in 2023 alone. So by 2030, when a lot of our targets are due, whether it's the Sustainable Development Goals or the Global Action Plan on NCDs, by 2030, Jordan, if they sustain the investments that they have so far, is estimated that they'll avert more than 3,000 deaths and generate more than $500 million in savings. So we'll continue to share and make public all of the investment case findings, plenty more coming, but anytime you need some numbers to build the case for public awareness campaigns or Article 12 implementation, please reach out and let us know, and we'll be happy to work with you on it. Happy to take any questions later, and we'll of course share the slides and look forward to discussion. Thank you.
A huge thanks. Enfin, je peux parler en français en fait, puisqu'il y a la traduction. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. It was very interesting. And a big thank you. And we've got a few minutes now in order to take some questions. Do we have people, participants who would like to ask questions to one of our conferenciers? Because I could see in the chat that Jean-Marie Bolican namely had a question regarding the French example for the addiction fund, in order to know if within the programs there was some funding that were made for other countries than France. Claire, Marie-Caroline, can you reply to that question? Yes, effectively, it says Claire, a lot of fundings are done nationally and regionally, and also some of them internationally, mainly funding the participation of France to the CLAT participation for the funding at the Francophone platform that is done today, but we do not fund specifically a country to that respect. Thank you very much, Claire. Do we have any other questions who would like to take the floor or ask their question? Don't hesitate to ask them in English if you need to. I do not get the impression that anybody has a question. And thank you. Yes. Two people. How can we limit the increase of social inequalities within the national plan? Could you say to which person you're targeting this question, please? So regarding social inequalities, yes, we will share the presentation. No special person. So one of the people who have spoken, would you be able to talk about how can we limit the increase of social inequalities regarding health for the national actions that have been taken in this respect? Anybody who wants to reply to that?
Give a quick one. Zunda or some other colleagues may have more expertise on it than I do, but as part of these cases, we've done equity impact assessments on the distributional effects of higher tobacco taxes. It's always important to emphasize that tobacco taxes are not particularly regressive, because those most likely to change their behaviors are those with lower incomes. And so the health benefits, that we have all these huge benefits, tend to occur disproportionately among those with lower income. So in the investment cases, and I saw Tibor share the link, usually where there's tax data, there'll be a chapter in each one with the charts for, which income quintile benefits most from higher
Allô,
taxes.
tu m'entends?
Thanks.
Alors, Myriam,
Bon,
attention, nous vous
enchantée de faire ta
entendons
connaissance,
également.
Catherine.
Mais nous aussi.
Miriam was asking a question.
Voilà. Désolée.
Miriam took the floor.
Merci beaucoup, Delis, pour cette réponse.
Thank you very much, Dudley, for your reply.
Yeah, I'm going to say it in English, maybe, so that's not to confuse the interpreter. But I think one of the way of reducing social inequalities and health inequalities is to do a lot of tobacco control work, and also to make sure that we target those, as Dudley mentioned, there's an impression that taxation may be regressive. It's not, right? We know, but doesn't mean that it's easy to get people on lower social levels to actually stop smoking. So we need to really help those people that have most difficulties. And I think Claire has made the connection as well. When we look at the addictions and the fund of addictions, it's just, you will see that people will have multiple addictions when there is social inequality as well. So you could also look at this from this perspective of really targeting and helping people that are the most chances of being not helped by other ways, for example, or especially in cessation. So I think, tobacco control is reducing social inequalities. We've seen from Dudley's numbers as well, that who dies prematurely as well, so if you tackle this and other social addictions or other health issues, but tobacco control is one of the most effective ways of reducing social inequalities. Thanks.
I was just going to say, I feel like the economists have already spoken. So, I mean, Dudley's excellent, Sylvain, excellent contribution on that. I think, as they've both mentioned here, taxation really is, I think, one of the best tools available to actually reduce the inequality you speak of. And as been mentioned, regression tends to be, the regressivity of the tax tends to be one of the arguments that is usually played out there by the industry and other players against taxation. But what we also see is that the most sensitive groups when it comes to increases in prices are really the groups that are most burdened by NCDs, by tobacco-related illnesses. So as we increase the taxes and increase the prices, they're the ones most likely to reduce their consumption and therefore reduce the burden of disease from these products. So yeah, I completely agree with Dudley and Sylvain for their contributions on this. Thank you so much.
Merci à tous les trois. Ouf, vos réponses.
Thank you very much to all of you, and all your replies are going to the same way. So within the debate, so we've got a few other questions that you can see in the chat. The question of Elodie Urs, I believe for the colleague of the Addiction Fund, I am a manager within the health, within the prison center with very precarious public? Do the budgets allocated allows the healthcare professional to set up actions in order to promote health regarding cessation of tobacco consumption or psychoaddictive substances for the prisoners? If the question is for the funds fighting addictions, maybe Caroline has shared the addiction fund address. Maybe the question would be able to be resolved by email. I believe that the question is going to imply other questions as well from the people representing the fund. Say yes, in order to reply quickly, there's a roadmap, says Claire Demel from the funds from France, and the people who are taking part for the month without tobacco. For example, we can give credit to the prison center to take new measures that are taken for the next program to fight against tobacco consumption to that public prisoners, because we know that there is a lot of tobacco consumption within prisoners, and we need to take it into account for the prison centers. Because there are a lot of prisoners who are smoking, and we've had a study that was made by the French Office of the Addictions that set up in place a study of research on the targeted public prisoners. We're going to be able to see what the figures are from this study to support us. Thank you, Claire. Simon, I believe, was asking about the question was in English, as you can see it. Look at it in the chat. You've got the question in English because there is the service.
Migrant and ethnic minorities do not benefit the national tobacco control policies or prevention as much as the general population, but targeting of the minorities is left to local stakeholders, which could appear unfair in terms of use of national budget. Donc, je ne sais pas si ça appelle des réponses côté Dudley, Sylviane ou Sunda.
So I'm going to sing Sylviane, Sunda, and everything because it's talking about what you've said, because you've got not everybody is taken into account within the migrants, and the different ethnic minorities are taken into account in this. Does someone wants to take again that theme and talk about it? Maybe Sylviane?
I just don't want to confuse the interpreter when I think it's a really big question there. And I don't know if Simon is from France, specifically asking this question from France and targeting our French national tobacco control policies and support, which I think is, I think that's a specific question. But largely, I think Dudley and others, I think this is an area that, migrant population is associated with a lot of challenges as well. And I don't know if there's any publication on that, on this groups, and maybe that's something for, I don't know, maybe Tibor can answer this, if the FCTC is looking at it as a specific populations, and whether there's a need to assess this. I don't know, that I'm too far out of tobacco control to be, but I would think that would be a really good thing for the FCTC to tackle largely.
Merci Sylviane. Je vois qu'il y a également une question, en tout cas une remarque.
Thank you, Sylviane. And I can see that there is a remark on the non-application of civil societies as a break against the anti-tobacco consumption, and how to finance for the civil society organization to make them more aware within the population. I think part of the replies from our addiction fund colleagues have targeted and talked about the civil societies in France. So I do not know how it's working, how the workings are made in other countries, but I think it's been done in France. But in any way, I can confirm that linking with Article 12, it is also important to link it, the funding of these organizations, in order to create an ecosystem, the wholesome ecosystem that is complete in itself for them to work. In order to talk about it, says Claire, the association to fight against tobacco, they are very mobilized nationally and regionally speaking in order to divulge different projects and to disseminate them in this respect.
In some Francophone countries in Africa, we had worked with national governments to include NGOs for funding in their national plans. I think in some places there is really support, not large, you know, but not always insufficient potentially. But in one of the examples I mentioned about, you know, what NGOs can do to actually make sure that the legislation is not violated by the tobacco industry, for example, there's a huge role there that governments could give to NGOs to conduct. So there are examples we could look at. From memory, there's definitely in Burkina and in Chad as well, where there may be some support, you know, at least for some activities, for example. And there's the international funders as well. I know that we at Vital Strategies and others benefit from support, and there's also grants program. So there are also other sources of funding. That may be another topic to discuss. Structure funding. Yeah, thanks.
Donc, Eddie Mvula.
Okay, Eddie Mvula, commenting about the impact of the inexistence of communication for the tobacco initiation. I'm not sure I fully understand it. Do you mean that we don't know? Are the studies not sufficient to measure the impact, or is there no impact? I'm not sure I understand what you're getting at. Well, I would like to, if I may comment on my question, is our objective is firstly to ensure that teenagers do not start smoking. That is our main action, to be able to stop, to counteract, to fight against this. And when you have all the lying campaigns regarding tobacco, but what we mean is that teenagers are targeted, and they're not targeted directly. At the moment, all the tobacco industry is targeting teenagers, young people, to prepare them to be smokers later on and to consume cigarettes. So what is the strategy that the FCTC or various states could adopt to ensure, to try to have a true, a hard-hitting impact on teenagers to ensure they don't start smoking? Okay, I will start. I can start the answer, and then my colleagues will be able to intervene again. I don't think there is just one strategy. I think we need various strategy, a multi-aspect strategy that can be efficient, indeed, to prevent young people and teenagers to start smoking. So I would advise you in a few weeks, a few months, to go back on our website, and we are planning to publish quite a few studies, surveys on this regarding these actions to prevent the initiation to tobacco smoking for the youngest people. So the fight against addiction, earlier we talked about funding, actions that develop the skills to ensure we prevent initiation to tobacco smoking. For instance, The Truth, which is an American campaign and which is managed with various support, and that enables to delay or prevent the initiation to tobacco smoking from the youngest people amongst our population. If any of my other colleague would like to say something, it's already 12 past the hour. All I'll say, you're totally right to mention this. Once again, let's not reinvent the wheel. And the FCTC, in English, we have this convention and we have to ensure and that all the states apply this convention, implement it. We know sometimes it doesn't work, but we know what works and what doesn't, and what works really well. And I know Zunda didn't have a chance to tell us. I know that the price of the tobacco packet is a big part of it. And the price is our main weapon against tobacco smoking, you know, for tobacco control, not just for teenagers, for all age groups. And also the environment, you know, when it's forbidden, smoking is prohibited in all public spaces, no more advertisement for it's not a glamour product. Tobacco is not glamorized anymore. It's a neutral packaging and so forth. All this is part of our convention on tobacco control, framework convention on tobacco control. So we have to ensure that we target also young people, but we have to ensure we have the right framework to ensure we can succeed as regards social skills, because the tobacco industry have huge means as regards marketing to recruit smokers or future smokers. So let's ensure that we implement the framework convention in all its aspects and also push to denounce these sinister, inverted commas, actions by tobacco companies, by the tobacco industry. And also government should not be scared to really push for anti-tobacco campaigns and so forth, to really go for it, to really go for this fight against tobacco smoking and not just be half-hearted about it. Sorry, I spoke for a long time, but it was important. Thank you for your intervention. Tibor, yes, indeed, just to complete what Sylviane just said, because indeed you mentioned all these various actions, and they are excellent actions to prevent tobacco initiation. And, pardon, excusez-moi.
Tobacco industry reaches this group. So Article 5.3, very important, horizontal, comprehensive, applies to every measure which is promoted, which is required under the convention. So the tobacco industry should be prevented from reaching out to children, should be prevented from publicize their products. And we hear from the parties' reports that this also applies to the new novel and emerging tobacco products and nicotine products, which are very much targeted at the younger population, as they are promoted as healthier alternatives to traditional cigarettes. So tobacco industry interference and Article 5.3 is also a very important component of this fight. Thank you very much.
Merci pour ce complément. Et je vais...
Thank you for this. And I will now take the last questions and then we will have to close. I'm absolutely delighted that there is so much discussion around this important topic. Jean-Marie Bolicat, please go ahead.
On vous entend, enfin, en tout cas, pour ma part, on ne vous entend pas.
Jean-Marie Bolicat, we can't hear you. We can't hear the gentleman at all. So maybe write your question because we still can't hear you. We can't hear Jean-Marie Bolicat. There's no sound. I'm absolutely sorry about this technical hitch. We cannot hear the question from Jean-Marie. So there's nothing in the chat. Okay, so yeah, there's a new, okay, yes, Jean-Marie Bolicat is apologizing that he couldn't get his sound sorted out, I think. So I suggest that we close now this webinar. Miriam, your microphone is on and we can hear everything you say. Please, would you like to say something? If not, please turn off your microphone. Miriam, thank you very much. Okay. So I thank all the participants, all the speakers who agreed to share with us their expertise. Thank you, Dudley, for your nice compliment in the chat. That was very, very kind of you, Dudley. Thank you to the interpreters that have enabled us to ensure this webinar was more accessible throughout the world. And also thank you to all the participants for listening and for their comments. And to conclude, a